So in the last video, we saw that we used Azure policy to enforce the tag default value on resources. But what is Azure policy? It actually has a wider use beyond just tagging. You can use the Azure policy service to define policies that will enforce your company's standards and service level agreements across all of your resources or specific resources. For example, here are a small selection of the built-in policies that you can optionally choose. We already talked about applying a tag in its default value or enforcing a tag, but you can actually restrict your subscription to only certain virtual machines, SKUs, only certain resource types so that you can create virtual machines but you can't create web apps or vice versa. You can restrict it to certain geographic locations in terms of regions, etc. So there are a number of these default policies that you can choose from. You can also create your own policies. Let's switch over to the Azure portal and we can examine the Azure policy service. All right, we're back on the portal here. I'm going to go to all services, type in policy, go to the policy section, and we can see that the policies that we created in the last video have all been removed, which is fine. Let's just switch down to the assignments section. And if I say assign policy, the first thing we need to talk about is the scope. Now, I've been working on the entire subscription scope in the last video, but you can actually go and choose specific resource groups. So let's say that I wanted this policy that I'm about to add to only affect this one resource group. I can certainly choose that, and that becomes the scope of this policy. We can also exclude specific resources. So we are including the scope of only this resource group. I don't want the network security group, add selected scope, to be included in these policies. Okay. Now, if we go, the real meat of it here is within the policy definition. If I look at it, I can see the default policies, the built-in policies that Microsoft provides. I can actually filter based on my own custom policies or Microsoft's built-in policies. It appears that they're adding policies. I think I was here about 2 days ago and there were 107. So they've added 2 policies in the past couple of days. Policies are generally broken down into these kind of restrictions that will not allow things to happen on your account, or auditing. So for instance, I'm going to search based on audit. We can see here that there are 70 of the 109 policies that contain the word audit. And what this does, like this audit VMs that do not use managed disks. This will basically make it a compliance issue where if I choose this one, which I will, then I can basically say any VMs that are in this resource group that do not use managed disks will go into a compliance report. And now I, as a governance function or a compliance function, I can follow up with that team and say, why aren't you using managed disks? This is our company standard for Azure resources, etc. So that's one example of it. The other thing, of course, are the enforcements. So we can, if we're talking about tags, we can enforce the tag. We can also enforce OS upgrades. We can basically enforce encryption on data lakes and password complexity requirements, okay, as examples. You can deploy threat detection. So for any of your SQL servers, we can basically ensure that threat detection is enabled, require SQL Server version 12, transparent data encryption on all SQL databases, etc. So these Azure policies are basically enforcing your company's top-level standards onto Azure as a whole. Now, the other type of policy are your custom policies. So if we go into definitions, we can see the built-in policies, and we saw in the last video that these things are on GitHub, and we can actually copy the JSON from those. We can also create our own policies. So basically, if you go down, I'm going to scroll here, we can see the JSON definition of the policy rule. And the policy rule has sort of an if-then syntax. So if not location is in a field of array of allowed locations, then this becomes an audit, right? So we can sort of read this as being this is how a policy is defined. And then these are the parameters that the list of allowed locations need to be passed in as a parameter. So this is a JSON syntax. It's actually pretty easy to read, pretty easy to understand, and you can write your own. So if you want to restrict on other types of fields besides location, you can certainly do that.